Hello, I'm Kate Fairhurst. I'm co-founder and CEO of GrowthMinds. Welcome to De-risking New Market Expansion. Thanks everyone for coming along. I hope it's useful for you. The focus of this session is the top 3 growth killers and how you can identify them and what to do about them when they're in front of you. My intention is by the end of the next 30 minutes, I hope that you'll all have learned a framework that you can use that really ensures that your future activities are as de-risked as possible, and that you have some practical ideas of how to go about really using that framework. To kick off, I'll give you a short intro about myself and what we do here at GrowthMinds for some context. Then I'll walk you through these 3 top growth killers that we've really repeatedly witnessed damaging market expansion. And I intend to share an example of each of them so you know what that looks like, and maybe you'll be able to recognize some of that yourselves. After that, we get into what needs to be done to avoid them. For that, the first thing I'll do is to walk you through a framework to follow for implementing market expansion in a way that de-risks it. And then I'll share some practical approaches to tackling each of the 3 growth killers in turn so that you can give them a special focus. And then finally, we have 10 minutes for a Q&A at the end. I believe that it's easy enough to add your questions into this box here. If we run out of time to get to your questions, please feel free to drop me a line. You can connect with me on LinkedIn, or you can reach me on kate@growthminds.com. Alrighty, so yeah, a bit about us. GrowthMinds are a growth consultancy. We work with growth stage businesses, startups, scale-ups, but also established multinationals who are still looking to expand. And we engage particularly in those tricky stages of growth and expansion where it's really important to have an academic approach and a specialist skill. We've been going for 5 years. Between my co-founders and myself, we've taken 4 startups to exit. And we founded the company because of our own experiences of how hard growth is, and also how tricky it is for businesses of any size to embed a growth mindset into their ecosystems. For established multinationals, it's so hard because of the cultural changes. And for startup businesses, there's often a passion to move quickly that overrides the ability to take an academic approach. So it is difficult on both sides. GrowthMinds works with quite a range of different companies, including the ones you see in front of you. We probably work with about 2/3 B2B and about 1/3 B2C. We help businesses of any size really who are focused on growth or expansion, and we support with both brain work to help guide growth thinking and also legwork to ensure that growth initiatives are built well, really. So yeah, we have actually quite a range of experiences from where we've been so far. At the moment, we've got a client on one side who's got 7 staff and I think 2 paying customers. And right on the other, we've got a client at the moment who have nearly 100,000 staff and billions and billions in turnover. So we've had to learn how to adapt our growth mindset into a number of different businesses of all sizes, and also what it takes to make it work in all of those kind of different cultural environments. And I'm here today to share as much of that with you as I can in 20 minutes. So onwards. 3 top growth killers. So I say 3, but obviously there are an awful lot more. There are dozens of growth killers, but we have 20 minutes and I want to be useful. So I'm going to stick to the top ones that, as I say, we repeatedly see decimating growth and market expansion for any size of business. The number 1 key growth killer is entering a market with a message that doesn't resonate. A key consistent point that we see here is a business not considering how product market fit might adapt as the market that they are approaching changes. And that's not working because to engage with any particular market, it's really critical to be reflecting the pain points that that local market is facing. I say local, I'm not just talking about geographies, I'm also talking about industries as well. But really, whether you're going to be looking to expand in your own geographical territory into new areas or beyond your early adopters, or whether you're looking to completely crack the globe, you do need a unique message for where you're going to. So an example of a client we've got in this situation. So I'll never be specific about the clients because the information that I'm sharing is very personal to them and they'd rather I didn't. But all of these are actual real world examples. So the first business here is a British founded B2B SaaS company. It's got a software platform that can be used in quite a number of different ways, actually. It's quite complicated. When we first met them, they were failing with their expansion as they were trying to put the same message into front of everyone. The same value proposition was being presented to companies in Germany and being presented to the same companies in Japan, being presented to the same companies in telecoms, the same companies in maritime, and the same companies in government, and so on and so forth. This was bizarre, particularly given each one of the markets that they're operating in have completely different degrees of requirement and interest in their value proposition. There were actually a number of secondary issues here, cultural issues actually, as a result of their board being overly aggressive in terms of their demands for growth. And as a result of that, the management team were attempting to do everything at once. And of course, that wasn't working, because if you try and do too many things at once, you run the risk of failing at all of them because you're stretched too thin. But anyway, the one blocker that was really determining their failure to execute on any of these market tests was the fact that they were putting a message in front of target buyers that fundamentally did not resonate. And that was because they'd not taken the time to engage in any customer interviewing. And by doing that customer interviewing, they would have been able to learn about the unique pain points that each of those markets faced. By assuming that the pain points would be the same, they were leading with the wrong info. Now, I'm not saying that none of the pain points overlapped, of course they did, but frequently one market had its own matters arising that meant that the standard ones didn't land with any impact. And by skipping the customer interviewing, they missed the opportunity to learn what needed to be adapted and how to present that in the customer's own words. So really, by trying to move faster, to responding to that board pressure to move quickly, they were running far too quickly and just failing to execute at all. The second growth killer is looking at an inability to benchmark a new market's unit economics. So what this comes down to is a lack of business intelligence that would help to inform whether target market is viable, and also lack of those business analytics that allows you to benchmark whether performance is where it can be expected to be. And this comes back down to, without knowing whether your unit economics are going to work, or the timescales, I suppose, needed for them to work, your market entry decision-making is always going to be impeded. Without knowing how many deals are realistic from a market and what a deal is going to cost your business in total, you can't validate that the market is a priority ahead of any other. Another example for you here. So this is of a fairly well-established American business that we were working with a couple of years ago. They had a strong footprint in North America, and they were really keen to grow in the rest of the US and also in Asia and Europe as well. So they jumped straight into trying to drive leads for their New York-based sales team through international marketing activity. Now, the issue here was that they hadn't had the benefit of data or experience to guide them what realistic impact the cost of one of these leads in any one territory would be for them. And without this business intelligence, they were unable to make the decisions that would allow them to get the unit economics right for this expansion. And so the activity they launched was loss-making for them, despite the fact that the marketing activity they were doing was actually performing at an acceptable level from a market benchmarking standpoint. So they were doing things fine, the marketing activities were built correctly, but the channels were never going to deliver them a positive impact in the way that they were running them, just because they hadn't learned what they needed to do in order to be able to run them correctly. So they could optimize the channels, of course, but that was always going to be a matter of marginal gains rather than seeing a huge sea change. And, ultimately the marketing activities that they picked were simply not able to deliver a positive impact within a window of opportunity that worked for them economically, without going large with their spend in a way that they just hadn't realized would be needed. So for these guys, it would have been better for them to pick a single market, learn how long it would have taken them to get to returns and what a deal might cost, and then dedicate the full budget of seeing that through, rather than fragmenting it across all of the different territories at once. Just one example, and the solutions are different for different businesses, but that's what can happen if you're unable to benchmark your unit economics. So the final of the top 3 growth killers is about poor audience targeting and selling to the wrong people. This is closely aligned to the product market fit element, in that this is struggling to reach and identify the people who have that product market fit, and also to pick the right channels or initiatives to isolate and approach those people. In that circumstance, time and money is wasted selling a value proposition to the wrong people. So an example for you here, it's a business that we're currently working with. It's a massive publicly listed multinational. It's got something like 80,000 people, 20 billion in turnover, I think. When we started working with them, they had a product that landed with the B2C audience really well. They were getting a solid flow of small deals, but they wanted to move up the value curve. Value curve. They wanted an enterprise client base. And as is often the case with complicated software businesses, there were many different ways of deploying their tech. To be honest, they weren't 100% solid at their product market fit in any one of these different markets, but they also hadn't given time and space to consider where their strongest product market fit was and to double down behind that. So ultimately, they were targeting people based on the historical ways that they'd learned to do this, which was a job title and an industry. And so the people they were reaching were not necessarily people who were trying to solve the problem that their platform was able to solve. And as such, their website traffic largely made up of people who were never going to buy their services. It was junk. So what we needed to do to get them back on track was, of course, to make sure that they gave respect to their product market fit and spent time to speaking with their customers because they'd not given space to that, but then to move on to audience targeting and really to completely reverse how they were going about targeting their enterprise prospects. And this was about focusing on moving away from traditional based persona targeting and instead using methods to reach audiences based on who is actually trying to get a particular job done, which would mean that they would need your specific product and service. If someone is trying to buy a service to solve a pain point you can fix, has the means to pay for it. It doesn't matter what their job title is. In fact, with increasing diversification of job titles these days, targeting based on job titles are actually getting in the way. Only by reaching people who are trying to solve a critical pain point are you then able to make a step change in your market visibility and your market viability. So those are the 3 top growth killers and some stories about how we've seen them emerge. There are so many examples of this, but that's just 3. You'll have noticed that these core issues are as a result of faulty decision-making, not weak execution. Of course, those execution issues come up. It could be wrong channel partners or hiring the wrong sales staff or building marketing campaigns badly. But typically, if you can nail your decision-making ahead of new market entry, you'll stand a much better chance of being able to win. Once that's done, you can focus on the execution without growth killer lurking in the background waiting to bite. But if you don't put that thinking part first, then you can never be sure that you're de-risking your growth. So that's why what we preach to our clients is the importance of brain work rather than leading with legwork alone. You must make intelligent growth decisions. It's about providing yourselves with a safe journey to win. Only by putting your brain work first can you de-risk your growth. So how we approach this is by having teams to work on each area. And this is what we guide our clients to do. So we have a brain work team that provides information to an expanding business that needs to be able to accurately prioritize and implement what's actually going to move the needle, and also helping avoid tasks that will burn capital without positive ROI. And then there's a legwork team that steps in and helps with the implementation of those initiatives and sees through with necessary technical skills that are needed. You need a symbiotic relationship between brainwork and legwork that means that implementation and execution teams are complemented by rigorous brainwork. Now, that's not that easy, as much of this thinking has not yet been structured within businesses, and existing teams can also be resistant to accepting that there's a more advanced way of utilizing business intelligence than the ways they're doing right now. There's also a strange obsession everyone seems to have with being responsible for strategy as well. So making this change needs to be done sensitively so people know that it's not a matter of taking away their power, but providing them with control so their department's remit is able to succeed. But bottom line is, only by prioritizing putting brainwork ahead of new market activation are you going to be able to avoid the growth killers and de-risk your expansions. And I would heartily recommend thinking about your brainwork as a separate function to your legwork team. So then, this 4M framework, this is the framework I would recommend your brainwork and legwork teams follow to ensure that you're giving due consideration to business intelligence before new market entry. It's a 4-step approach that we've created based on leading startup academic principles, and that we validated worked as much better than a traditional marketing or sales alone approach. We've established really, I think, in our business experiences that prioritizing speed over control just slows things down. So the purpose of this 4-step framework is to provide control and therefore to actually allow things to happen faster. So these are the 4 steps we'd recommend. Map stage is typically where you can go about tackling those 3 growth killers and giving each one of them the due respect and time and consideration and calculation that you need. There are other things that we do at map stage, which I would recommend that you get onto as well. Things around looking at customer journeys, building out ecosystems, doing competitive research, doing things like keyword research. But, you know, at this stage, given the time that we have, the really 3 critical things that you must do at map is map out your product market fit locally and define your messaging based on it, define your likely conversion rates and your unit economics, and then also to figure out how to do more compelling targeting. And I'll move on to how to do each one of these with some tools in a moment, but that's really critical there. Once that's done, you can launch in your new market. And typically I'd recommend, if you're a smaller business, to launch an MVP rather than a full growth ecosystem at that point in time. But no matter what size you are, once you've launched your initiative, I really, really recommend setting up measuring, and then for a few months, leave things alone. Don't fiddle while the data comes through that allows you to see how things are working. And then once, but only once, you've got enough learnings to see what adjustments need to be made, at that point, then you can start looking at some modifications. And if you're looking at marketing tests, I would definitely suggest that you do that in a controlled way, which will allow you to learn something useful. And bear in mind here that probably only between a 5th and a 6th of marketing modifications are likely to work. And then once you've found your blockers and you've overcome them, you're able to think about multiplying things. So for this 4-step framework, this 4M framework, we've built about a dozen tools to implement each of those phases. There's not time to go through all of them. So I'll just walk you through the 3 of them that we use to target those 3 growth killers, and I've said that you should get into at map stage. So our recommended solution to misfired messaging is a piece of work to align product market fit and messaging for each market you're approaching. You need to start with your product market fit, and with a controlled process, fill in knowledge gaps and truly learn about the market. We encourage all of our clients to speak with at least 20 target clients each month, to listen and learn in isolation, or in isolation of a sales pitch as well. Not just listen and learn in isolation, but when you've heard, don't pitch back again. And that's really important, because you can't lead people if you're able to get coloured learnings. If all you're getting is people's response to whether they want to buy your thing, then you won't get the truth from them. So once you've got that information, bring it back to the centre of the business and analyse it. We use a matrix we've built for this purpose that captures core market pain points and the jobs that people are trying to get done. And then we map out the alternatives that they're using to try and fill those pain points. And then we look at what the competitive landscape looks like, how much investment a target buyer has, along with what your unique value proposition and social proof is too. And we recommend thinking of a messaging journey where you can select different modules from this matrix to use for each of those 6 steps in the communication chain. Each step should move a business from never having heard of you before to being a committed customer who wants more. And each one of these stages requires unique messaging, but equally, each must reflect your product market fit and the customer language, so it's impactful. To avoid taking decisions without guidance from external benchmarks, the only real solution here is to invest time in learning about those local or industry or channel metrics that can sway your business decisions. You need to consider everything right the way from local CPC through to the difference in lead quality or sales conversion rates from non-native markets. I really would recommend going a step further if you can, and calculating target audience sizes too, in order that you can forecast a realistic number of deals alongside the cost per deal. Our solution to all of this was basically to build a massive benchmarking analytics dashboard. We now use that to benchmark all of our client data, and every time we use it, we carry out research to identify audience sizes for one market. We drop in the numbers, and the dashboard then spits out a forecast ROI for that market and for the type of campaign channel. To be honest, this has been a big piece of work for us, but it has been worth it, as it has allowed us to aggregate anonymized data across all of our different clients and update our benchmarks as the market evolves. You might not want to take on such a meaty journey, but you're going to need to find the data somehow. And then the final step is regarding audience targeting, and that's about going about building jobs to be done audiences. So the process that we use here, and that I would really recommend, really aligns actually nicely with the product market fit work that you've done earlier. So you went about the process as part of your product market fit definition, ideally, of actually naming the businesses who are serving your market with alternative solutions. So for each and every one of those businesses, be there a competitor or a synergistic non-competing service, you can then note them down on each of their channels, be that social media or their website. You can find them and look at their audience sizes and note that down. You can add in each event that serves the market, each training course, each potential business partner, each media title. And at the end of it, you've got a massive list of audience sizes for each one of those channels, and you can think about how you can go about targeting those people. Some of it you might want to do online, some of it you might want to do via email, you might need data extraction tools, but then, those lists of people that you get from those sources are people that will be trying to get those jobs done that would mean that they need your services. Okay, so in summary then, the best way to de-risk your market expansion and to accelerate your growth is to prioritize and implement what's really going to move the needle and ignore the things that are going to distract or take away control. And the way to do this is through brain work before you get into legwork. Start with a realistic view of what your opportunities actually are, measure them with external data, and consider what's needed to deliver positive unit economics for each opportunity. If, but only if, it looks like there's a viable market to launch a new initiative, then spend time listening to customers, learning their pain points, and use a product market fit messaging framework to ensure that the messaging you're putting in front of people really resonates. Equally important is taking the time to identify ways of reaching people based on jobs that they are trying to get done. Once that's done, you can launch your activities, you can measure them, and then be patient before messing around. Only when you've found and fixed any blockers should you then dial up your activity and think about the next market. And once that's done, you then should start the whole process again with the same good business rigor, the same mapping processes, because what you learned for your previous market may not count. Every market is unique. Okay, that's that. And now we're on to your questions answered. We can have a Q&A.